If you're like me, well, to be honest, I am not really addicted to social media. But every day I try to check in social media once in a while. One of the fascinating things that I noticed lately, it's about how many friends I actually have on social media. But actually, in reality, it's rather difficult to connect with all of them. I mean, I'm not saying that those friends are not important, and they are, because friendships create something extraordinary in our lives. But in reality, it's really hard to connect with them in person. But meanwhile, again, once in a while, I ran into the occasion that I would think someone I know in the mall or maybe across the parties and social occasions, but embarrassingly enough, that's not really the person I recognize. Initially, that was just a joke and we can laugh it off. But until I started to read this book, and of course, I'm very excited about our conversation with our guest today. Have you heard of something called face-blindness? I mean, again, this is something that happens to everyone, perhaps once in a while, or it could happen occasionally. But rather, it's difficult and also it's complicated just to use one sentence to describe the deeper analysis. Well, so that's why today, in light of the whole friendships and all the everything going on, we need to talk about this critical concept of face blindness and why it is still happening to all of us today, and also what is the scientific explanation behind it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Sadie Dingfelder. Sadie is a freelance science journalist. Her debut book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. Well, Sadie, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Sadie, again, this is a fascinating book that I have to say that I was so honored and fortunate to get started for the summer reading. But I want to dive into your book right away. Now, before we talk about face blindness, something unique and interesting grabbed my attention in your book is your initial conversation with your father. You try to tell your dad, and I quote, "I want to tell my dad about the study I'm participating in, but I'm not sure how it will go over." And you ask the question, Dad, have you ever heard of face blindness? And this is the part that your dad responded to say, "There's nothing wrong with you. You're just spacey." Sadie, let's start the conversation right there.
Yeah.
Why was it important for you to have that conversation with your dad? And also, after your dad said, "There's nothing wrong with you," how did you feel, or how did you think that it's going to carry on the conversation eventually can help your family members around you to understand face blindness? Go ahead.
It's really interesting. I think maybe it's typical for most parents to think their children are just perfect, right? And if a kid comes back with like, I think I might have a problem, especially with something that's like neurological, I think parents are just very resistant. Even though I am like, at the time I was like 39 years old, I'm doing fine, I'm married, but my dad just, I think just another thing is that parents, I'm the firstborn kid. And so they didn't know, they've never had a different kid, right? So I set the standard. And so they didn't realize that anything was amiss with me. I think the reason why I wanted to talk to my dad about it is because since he was there, he was a witness to my entire life. I wanted to know if he noticed anything weird, like the fact that I didn't, I got lost on school field trips because I couldn't like recognize my teacher or my fellow students. And that kind of thing. And of course they did notice, but they just sort of like put it under the umbrella of just like space. Like Sadie's a spacey kid. And actually, I think my brother put it best, when he said, he was like, we all knew something was up with you, but we didn't know what. Like we didn't have names for it. And sort of I went and discovered some of the mysteries in my life. I went and tried to like solve some of these long running life mysteries.
Well, Sadie, again, I have to say that your brother put in a very modest way. I mean, again, of course that because that none of us or none of your family members that realize that face blindness happened to everyone. I mean, or, it could be something that, like I mentioned in the intro, we feel like we know it, but deep down in us, we don't. We actually have the blind spot on face blindness. Now, let's go back to the book. Sadie, again, you documented your journey on this discovery, or we call the self-exploration, on this face blindness. So help us with this fundamental understanding. What is face blindness, and why do you think it's so, I don't want to use the word complicated, but it seems to be so intricate for us to explain and also for us to understand it. Even, let's just say, if I don't know anything about science, but still, it's still very complicated. So what is face blindness, and why do you think we are still not well informed about this?
Yeah, I think, okay, so it turns out that most human beings, neurotypical human beings, like 98% of the population, are actually weirdly good at recognizing faces. If you meet someone at a party and then run into them like an hour later, you're going to recognize that person. You are. I'm not. But if I showed you like a seashell and then like you ran into that seashell an hour later, you would not recognize the seashell as the one you saw earlier. You have, and the reason for this is because you have an entire part of your brain. It's like this big and it's just above your ear. And it's devoted entirely to face recognition and nothing else. So we're all born with these, with sort of a very basic face template. That's like sort of 2 eyes and a mouth. Babies right out of the womb focus on faces. It's amazing. I mean, faces are so important to human life. And so with face blindness, we just aren't good at that. Like we're better at like telling faces apart than telling seashells apart, but we're not nearly as good as like normal people are. And there's so many different possible reasons for it, because the human brain is, 1 billion neurons. Each of them have a couple thousand connections. We do not understand how it works. We're just beginning to figure it out. But if you want to know what a face looks like to a face blind person, one interesting sort of trick is to look at like a face of a celebrity really well, like upside down. And you'll see that it's actually a little bit harder to recognize the person because you are not able to use your face template as well because it's upside down. So the features actually like just don't hang together like they do when the face is right side up. And this is called the face inversion effect. And neuroscientists love this. If you go to a vision conference, like half of the presentations are going to talk about it because it's sort of mysterious. And yes, so I think that face perception is this really magical, amazing ability in the human brain. And that was something I learned when I was working on my book, was that it really made me appreciate not just that like my brain was falling short, but like all the amazing things that my brain does do every day in terms of vision. It's amazing how much visual processing happens underneath your conscious awareness.
Well, Sadie, I agree with you. I mean, again, I'm not a scientist. I remember when I was in college, in undergraduate school, my roommate, he majored in science, and he desired to be a neurosurgeon. I mean, oh God, I can't tell you how many times that we had the conversation about the fascinating and this uniqueness of human brains. Of course, when I was sitting there listening, you would think I was listening to Jon Stewart. I mean, it was just entertaining, but meanwhile, there's no way that I could remember everything that he talked about. And the same thing, the conversation we had about dinosaurs. But anyway, so Sadie, I want to, again, as I was reading this book, I want to talk about something that it's called the Jennifer Aniston neuron. And again, this is, everyone knows who Jennifer Aniston is. I mean, again, unless the person never watches his Friends or unless the person never connect with media. But one thing that in the book that you mentioned, I quote, we think it encoded the concept of her character on Friends and not the actress herself. So you actually had a conversation with an expert to talk about the Jennifer Aniston neuron. Help us with better understanding. What is the Jennifer Aniston neuron, and why do you think it's so critical for you to put this piece in the book when we talk about face blindness, or even talk about the complication of the brain works? Go ahead.
The Jennifer Aniston neuron, when they discovered it, it was sort of reported on incorrectly, according to Rodrigo Quianquerga, who I interviewed. Basically, it's in the hippocampus, which is a seahorse-shaped sort of inner brain area, and it is responsible for sort of bundling memories together. And they found that this person had epilepsy and was going to have brain surgery. So he or she had, I think it was a man, I don't know though, had his brain sort of exposed for a little while. And so the neuroscientist, they recorded individual neurons in this person's hippocampus for science before his surgery, because they already had this all set up to map his brain before surgery. So they showed him all of these pictures and of people, like they interviewed him about what kinds of things he like cared about and knew about. And then they showed him all these pictures, and they found a single neuron that responded to Jennifer Aniston no matter what direction her face was, and even in different haircuts and in different contexts. But they did, so they found a neuron that responded to Jennifer Aniston, and it's kind of amazing that there was this downstream neuron, that had generalized, just one little neuron. People at the time said that it was like sort of an important part of face recognition, but, and it definitely does show how we connect faces with all the things we know about a person. But it was probably just a temporary neuron, like that was just temporary encoding all of that information. And they did find that it would respond when Jennifer Aniston was with her friends, but not when she was with someone who was outside of the Friends universe, like Brad Pitt.
Well, Sadie, again, I want to go back to the book. Again, let's bring your father into our conversation. Again, this is the later chapter of the book that you wrote. When I wake up, I call my dad with my news. It turned out that you are legit face blind, and you said. And your dad chuckled awkwardly, saying, nah, your problem is that you just don't pay attention. Now, again, this is another type of humble way or mild way to comfort the child, to say, hey, honey, there's nothing wrong with you. You just don't pay attention. But actually, you have already participated numerous tests, exams, and also, you went great length to make sure that you follow the steps to find the results. Now, again, I want to go back to the question, why was it so difficult for you to share that with your dad, even though the first time your dad said, no, you are just a spacey kid, or you there's nothing wrong with you. And then the second time, even though you have the legitimate result, and then your dad still said, nah, there's nothing wrong with you, you just don't pay attention. What were you trying to connect with your dad? Well, what message you were trying to deliver to your father for this great effort? Go ahead, Sadie.
Oh, no, I just wanted him to try to see my life through this sort of scientific objective lens. Because as my father, and maybe this is kind of an American thing, but we're like, you can do anything. Like if you put your mind to it, and so my dad, he was like, well, you weren't paying enough attention. But when I was doing these Harvard studies, I was I was trying as hard as I could, right? But my dad is a little right, because in my everyday life, I have noticed that I don't bother looking carefully at people's faces. Like and I think it's in part because I just don't think it's that useful. And, you know, it hasn't turned out. And so you end up with this self-reinforcing cycle where I'm like, well, I'm not bothering to look, and then I'm not getting information. And then as a child, you're not getting the experience and the practice you need to learn to be an expert at face recognition. So as a parent, maybe it's important to encourage your kids to do things that even you can see that they're terrible at, you know? But obviously that ship has sailed. And so as a almost 40-year-old, I really wanted my dad to see me, you know, to see me as I really am, as someone who cannot tell human beings apart very well.
Sadie, let's put some numbers in our perspective. You mentioned about 6 million Americans, the vast majority of whom have never been diagnosed. Now, when you discover that number, well, when you approach that number, let me ask the very simple question. How much were you surprised? I mean, again, we're looking at a majority of the people who can be identified as, you know, suffering or, you know, have this face blindness, but they've never been diagnosed. So how was your reaction about this number? And also, what motivated you to keep on pursuing this journey or keep on pursuing this path? It's not, I understand, it's not just about yourself. It's you really want to get the story out to raise awareness and let people understand the truth behind this. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting how people, the thing is that you only have your own experience, right? You don't have anything to compare it to. So if you were to beam into my head, you would immediately notice that you couldn't tell people apart, I'm sure. You would also think the world was very flat because I'm stereo blind. I only see out of one eye at a time. But for me, my perspective is what I've always had, and I'm completely used to it. And so I think that's why people don't realize anything is amiss. And it's only when you do have the opportunity to compare yourself to other people, like maybe you're watching movies, and that's actually one of the most common ways that people figure out that they're face blind, is that they, like, a woman in a movie puts on a hat or gets a makeover, and you have no idea who it is, and you're constantly asking your friends or your partner who characters are. So yeah, I think that it really explains why most people never really think about it. But also, it's kind of sad because with children especially, you know, if you don't have an explanation for why you're having trouble making friends, you just think, you know, that there's something wrong with you, that you're, something is kind of wrong with you, but you might think that it's a character flaw, or, you know, they're just deeply unlikable, versus something that you can kind of work around. And I think a lot of people who are face blind do figure out workarounds. Some of us are just like super friendly to everyone, and others are just very shy and try to keep our social circles small. So, but the reason why I really want to raise face blindness awareness is because if you can find the kids who are face blind and give them, you know, that information, then they can lead maybe have a normal like social life by using sort of workarounds, or just telling people when you meet them that you're not going to be able to recognize them later because you have this weird neurological disorder.
Well, Sadie, again, I have to say that, as I mentioned before, the more I read about your book, number one, it's fascinating. I mean, again, it's not just about what you wrote in the book. As a journalist, it's about the stories, the truthful and honest stories that you shared in this book. 2 more questions before letting you go, Sadie. As I was continuing to explore more in this book, and another fascinating piece is you actually encountered some of the celebrities who also suffered or who also have this face blindness. And one of them is the co-founder of the Apple company. It's Steve Wozniak. So can you walk us through this journey? What was the reaction that when you find out that Steve also suffered from this issue and also along other celebrities? And how do you think you're saying, oh, by the way, I have face blindness. Hey, by the way, celebrities have it. So yeah, we're on the same page. Let's talk a bit more about this, Sadie.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a weird neurological disorder, it's a pretty cool one to have because we have a lot of like really neat, famous people. Jane Goodall is face blind, and I interviewed her by email, but it wasn't quite interesting enough to get into my book. But she said that she was excellent at telling the monkeys apart, but it did take her longer than it took other researchers to learn how to tell the chimpanzees apart that she was studying. And yeah, who else do we have? We have Steve Wozniak. He's really interesting because he actually has acquired prosopagnosia. So most people have developmental prosopagnosia. And as a result, we don't know what it's like to recognize faces normally. But Steve Wozniak does. And so he was in a plane accident, and he went from being able to recognize faces, being an excellent face recognizer, to, or at least a normal one, to having prosopagnosia. But he couldn't really give me a lot of insight into how it affected his life because he said around the same moment was when he became famous. And so all of a sudden he was meeting all of these people that he didn't know, and no one really expected him to remember them. So it kind of worked out for him.
Well, I mean, again, Sadie, you mentioned that face blindness is one of the cool things that you actually could connect with a lot of people, also a lot of celebrities. It's fascinating to struck a conversation with friends and, really to open up this journey. Now, Sadie, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, your book is called Do I Know You? A Faceblind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. Let's just say for anyone, I mean, again, see myself, for example, before reading your book, that I had no idea about face blindness. Now, after reading this book, it's eye-opening, it's enlightening, But meanwhile, Sadie, as a reporter, as a writer, what would you expect the readers to understand and appreciate when we finish reading the last chapter of your book? I mean, again, this is not a diary. This is not a book just documented about your life. This is, again, it's the how can I say? It's a collection. It's a cumulative collection of personal stories, scientific research. This unknown aspect of a person, and also about the hope, for the people around us, the awareness, the realization. So putting together, what are your expectations from the readers?
Oh, I guess I just hope that readers come away with the knowledge and that other people have abilities and perceptions that might be wildly different from your own. Like, I thought that I was pretty normal. And like most people, I assumed that my experience was, everyone else's experience was similar to mine. And so as a result, like I've been misunderstanding basically everyone my entire life. And it's so interesting. Like, that's what I hope people will come away with, is this sort of sense of wonder and curiosity about other people's inner lives and perceptions.
Well, again, Sadie, I have to say this is a fun read. I mean, again, this is a great book that especially for us to travel and also for us to understand about the unknown parts of the world. And again, as we mentioned before, brain, it's one of the fascinating elements of our human civilization. Of course, it's not just about the scientific research. It's really about the discovery, the exploration that we're able to embark on. So again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to talk to Sadie Dingfelder. Again, Sadie is a freelance science journalist, and I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this amazing book, which is called Do I Know You? A Faceblind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. Well, Sadie, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show for our future episodes. But meanwhile, again, we really appreciate your effort and also your amazing stories in this fantastic book.
Thanks so much, Will. It's been great chatting with you.